Dear listeners, welcome to Radio GAMeC 30 Years. 1999 is a year of major changes, especially in Europe. On the political front, the Balkan Peninsula remains at a reign of ethnic clashes. In March, shortly after Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic joined the NATO military alliance, NATO itself started bombing Yugoslavia to stop the repression of the Albanian majority in Kosovo by Serbian nationalist President Slobodan Milosevic. The bombing was to end on June 10th with the agreement in Kumanovo and the withdrawal of Serbian troops from Kosovo. Meanwhile, in Russia, at the end of the year, President Boris Yeltsin resigned from office, leaving his post to former KGB Colonel Vladimir Putin. On economic field, 1999 marked the birth of the euro, the new European currency, which 3 years later, in 2002, would definitely replace the old currencies of the 11 countries that had joined the Union. The global drive during this period was strongly geared towards liberalizing and the larger markets, a trend that, along with the high expectations from economic growth, also brought with it significant concerns about the fate of small local economies, the exploitation of workers in developing countries, and the centralization of capital. One of the most indicative signs of this concern is the advent of Hugo Chavez as president of Venezuela, a staunch critic of neoliberal globalization and US foreign policy. In this climate, on November 30, 1999, in Seattle, on the occasion of the International Summit of the Trade Organization, the impressive protest demonstrations organized by various dissident groups and the harsh clashes against the police that ensued marked the birth of the so-called No Global Movement, a large international movement which in the years following the Seattle riots and at least for the first decade of the 2000s was to become the strongest critical voice against neoliberal ideology and policies, uniting associations and citizens from all over the world from very different backgrounds. Born in Bern, Switzerland in 1957, Thomas Hirschhorn is one of the leading artists of his generation. Known for his sculptural constructions made from disposable mass-produced artifacts, Hirschhorn brings together references and images gathered from popular media with the work of radical theorists such as Gilles Deleuze, Georges Bataille, and Antonio Gramsci. His works aim to stimulate the viewer to become aware of his or her own visual baggage and to feel the need for elaborate critical thinking about geopolitical reality and contemporary social conditions. Hey, 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 hey. Thomas, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for your introduction, for your invitation. I never forget that you invited me to come to Nuoro in the beautiful country of Sardinia, the home country of Antonio Gramsci, to show my work, the easy collage and the collage truth. I never forget it. It was a beautiful experience.
In 1999, you took part in the Venice Biennale, curated that year by Harald Zeman, with the World Airport Flugplatzwelt, which was dealing with the question of globalization and its collateral paradoxical effects. It was the same year of the WTO protests and clashes in Seattle, what many consider to be the birth of the No Global Movement. What do you remember, Thomas, of that year, and what was, from your perspective, the importance of this movement?
In order to be honest, when I think on 1999, I only think on my work Flugplatzwelt at the Biennale of Venice, spontaneously. But of course, because it's your question then, if I have to go back and to look at what happened, then I remember the images I got of the violent clashes in Seattle, of course. I remember the birth of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. I remember the Belgrade was bombing. I remember the war in Kosovo. I remember the film Fight Club, which I saw and loved. I remember there was the Columbine High School massacre with 13 people died. I remember that was a very chaotic year. And in this year, of course, I was trying to give form to what I understood as a kind of contradictory, chaotical, over-complex movement of globalization on one part, and of more and more localized, even private wars that I could be the witness of. Therefore, I tried in this work, World Report, give form to this incredible movement, a kind of double-bind movement between the globalization and the critique of globalization, and also the tendency to conflicts, to more and more regional conflicts. To me, the year 1999 was the year of also the Chechenian War, and in the end of the war, there was the coming to power of Putin, with after next year, the years after, with the completely destructing of Grozny, etc., etc. It was a year of war to me. Not only the wars in the street, but also the wars in the field and the wars in the houses, in all kind of situations.
The No Global movement had its baptism in Seattle, but it was in Europe that it probably took on the largest dimensions, uniting trade unions, ecological groups, intellectuals, social centers, but also religious groups and humanitarian associations. Many artists took part in the protests and brought the themes of the movement into their own practices, which found place within institutions or major international art exhibitions. Which initiatives, Thomas, do you remember in particular?
I mean, I remember not an initiative, but I remember a question, a call, a demand. The demand of all coming out of this anti-global movement, the demand of to be an activist, and the demand of to take position, and of course the question of how to give form to this position. So to me, something I remember, and it was very, very helpful for me, I said, I am activist. I am the activist of my work, of my artist work, because in 1999, it was 16 years that I arrived in Paris, and I was completely into my work of art. So I understood the appeal to be an activist, but not as an activist who goes to the street and making protests, but the activist into my work. And I felt on demand, but also encouraged to, in the form of my work, to take over these interrogations about the world, about the time, and about the reality we are living in and we are sharing together. But me as an artist, I have belief in art. I believe in art. I have faith in art. I love art. I'm completely into art. And the question is, how can I then act in doing my artwork? So to me, there were three big dynamics. The first is to do a completely inclusive artwork. That was very important to me. Second, a completely affirmative artwork, and a positive affirmative artwork, and of course, an absolute non-violent artwork. But what means a non-violent artwork? It doesn't mean that it cannot go into a conflict or into a demand or into an interrogation. It can go to conflict. It must go to conflict, but it always must be in relation to the other. Therefore, the question of the other is so important in my work, but also something I understood coming out of this movement, the anti-global globalizing movement. I wanted to do a work which allows encounters. I wanted to do a work which creates dialogue. And I wanted, really very important, to do a work which is based on equality. And of course, I understood that I must be resistant. I must resist as an artist to this tendency to see myself as an object in this so complex and difficult world we are living inside. So I wanted to be an actor in this world.
Thomas, you started working in Paris as a graphic designer in the 80s. Some biographies tell that you took part in the group Grapus, which used the language of advertising on streets to advance political and social issues. The No Global movement made much use of the language of guerrilla advertising to advance its demands. What can you tell me about this phenomenon, and how do you think it has evolved?
Okay. If I have now the occasion to clarify something, it's perhaps not the core of your question, but Lorenzo, I never was part of the Grapus collective, never. But this was the reason I wanted to go to Paris, because I wanted to go to Paris and to integrate the Grapus collective. But they didn't want of me. That's very important. It was my failure. They didn't want me. They didn't want me for 3 reasons, and they are interesting. And also interesting in the perspective of your interrogation about anti-global movement. So the first reason was a political reason, because I think they didn't want to work with me because I was not enough politicized like they wanted, because they were really all members of the Communist Party. So they did, and I was not. I even was a fan of the Solidarność movement, and they didn't understand that this could be possible. Second, there was a problem of the form, and this is an interesting question, because it's not true that Grapus was working on the street. They were working with the Communist Party, they was working with the syndicates, and they was working with cultural institutions. But me, I wanted to do something utopian. I call it graphic design from myself. But there was no way, in a way, to find each other together in this perspective. And the third reason was why they didn't want that I integrated them. Of course, when I say integrated the team, I wanted to be one director. I didn't want to be executioner, somebody who makes an execution which they offer to me. I wanted to be one person who directed, as they 4 guys did. This reason was, the third reason, a generational reason, because I was a little bit younger than them. So after this big disillusion for me and this big failure for me, because the reason why I came to Paris was this, I was isolated. I did not know what to do with my utopian idea, to do graphic design from my own, which means without somebody who is asking for something, who is paying for something to do for the street, but from your own. That was my dream. That was my idea. And then a little bit earlier, 10 years earlier, in 1989, I remember very well because I wrote a text about, I saw an exhibition at the Centre Pompidou from Hans Hacke. And there I understood there is a possibility, but not in the field of graphic design, in the field of art, to express something on the surface in a way, but also on the deepness of our problems of the world. And therefore, I understood I had not to change my work, what I love to do, collages, make them very two-dimensional, and also try to work with what everybody knows, what everybody uses, but I have to put them in the field of art, only in the field in the history of art even, I thought there could be something I could call freedom, and also something who could be a development for my own insight, and a space for emancipation. And therefore, about this moment when I wanted to integrate Grappus, which was not possible, and I had to stand up then from my own and to find my own way to express myself.
So you soon started, Thomas, making large installations using common materials such as cardboard or plastic or adhesive tape. These are works, the ones you made between the end of the 90s and the first decade of 2000, often site-specific, I would say, sometimes also located outside the galleries or the museums. They are works that are in some way unsightly or bearers of an aesthetic of dissent, as it has been stated, that recode the languages and sometimes even the symbols of protest. What is the link with the cultural and political climate of those years?
Yes, two things. Yes, the link is important. The word link is very important. So I learned in reading, in thinking, and in looking, I read that Jean-Luc Godard said, it's not about to do political film, it's about to do film political. There is a difference. And I thought this is a fantastic affirmation. It's not about to do political art, but it's about to do art politically. And I took this over for me, and I understood that making not political art means to be responsible for everything which englobes my work of art. Means, for example, where it is, means the title, means the material, means the light put on, means the way how it is done. And you're right. I never used the term, for example, site-specific, which is an arty term, of course. I never used the type of installation. I use the term of sculpture because I want to do a work which is in the history of the sculpture, and affirm with my way to do it that this is the way, the new way to do a sculpture. I wanted to do a work, a big work, that's true often, a work where the people is complete, the persons, the spectators, whatever, is completely immersed in the work, has no overlooking. How? As I have not the overlooking of what is going on in the world. So to me, this was very important. What is also very important is that in these years, I thought there is a kind of overwhelming informations rolling on, and I wanted in my work also to give back this kind of overwhelming informations I had, and therefore there are a lot of texts integrated in my work. In 2001, by the way, there was also a big work I did, is called Wirtschaftslandschaft Davos, which was exhibited first in Zurich. And then this work is also a work about globalization, but it's about, by the way, my hometown, Davos in Switzerland, where I grew up for 20 years. And it's, of course, about the transformation for 1 week or 2 weeks in the wintertime in a completely military zone, yes? Under the perspective of global exchange, this beautiful landscape with snow came a military camp. And so therefore I made this work, Wirtschaftslandschaft Davos, which is also my form to engage with this landscape, with the history, the rich history of the town Davos I love, but also how they have to deal now with these questions of globalization, of economical power, of political power in this beautiful landscape. Therefore, I was interested in always looking out for a form in my specific aesthetic, which I call the aesthetic who wants not to intimidate and who wants to use the material which everybody knows and everybody uses.
You have always fought against a simplified relationship with the image and against the tendency of mass media photography to focus on partial aspects of reality. But for some years now, with your series of collages, you have also been questioning mankind's globalized addiction to image, and in particular, our increasing inability to read and interpret the violence and pain behind images. So now that we are once again in a war scenario, bombarded with images of wooden or torn bodies, what interpretation can you give us of the present moment, and how does it differ from the reality that we have learned about in the early 2000s?
Look, thanks to your questions about 1999 for me, concerning me, I made a kind of look back, and what is crazy and unfortunately what doesn't change is the repetition of wars. I remind the first Iraq war, then the Yugoslavia war, then the second war in Iraq, then the Syria war, then the Afghanistan war, and of course all the other local wars of Chiapas, in Rwanda, and of course now Afghanistan, and now of course the Ukrainian war. So there is, through 20 years, with a kind of incredible repetition, the same pictures coming on of destruction, of war. So several years, and it was always very important element for my work. Of course, now there is something changing. It's the social medias, the impact and the importance of the social medias. And not only now in the Ukrainian war, but several years ago with Abu Ghraib, you remember the photographs the people did themselves of the prisoners, for example, and so on. There is a changing of how to deal with this kind of incredible destruction. Also the destruction of the human body and the pictures we get of them. So I thought there is a difference now. Because the difference is not what says Donald Rumsfeld in the first and second Iraq war. He said death, to show death, has the tendency to encourage a depressing way of war. But of course, what other tendency has is makes sense than a depressing tendency of war. So, but of course, I could understand that more and more the war went on, less and less official medias show the pictures, not of destruction, but of destroyed human bodies. The picture of destroyed human bodies you can find in the social medias, and only in the social medias. And today, by the way, in Ukrainian war, you can have the confirmation of this. The dead bodies, the dead persons, the dead human being, the dead other is only to see in the social media. But the official medias are full with pictures of destruction, but nobody is there. So I thought, me as the artist, I have the mission to give form to these dead bodies, because it's about killing people. It's about this. So therefore, I made several works. The first one was the series of Ur-Collage. Then I made another series, Collage Truth. Then I made a series, Pixel Collage. And always I wanted to show the destroyed human being. And I wrote about why it is important to look and to show human destroyed bodies. And I wrote down 8 points. Why? Because the origin from where these pictures are coming, it's important. Second, the redundancy, of these pictures all over the world, all the time, so much of human destroyed bodies. The invisibility is exactly a reason why I have to show them the invisibility in the media today. The tendency of iconism. The tendency of iconism is just to show one picture for each other, and this picture gets the icon who says everything else. Then the reason is another reason, the tendency to only reduce it to a fact. Then another reason is why it's important, because it's the victim syndrome that is not the whole complexity of the war, the whole complexity of what's going on, and the irrelevance of the quality of the pictures I want to show, because it happened that people say, no, it cannot be shown because it has not a good quality, what for an incredible argument. And the eighth reason was the tendency of the hypersensitivity. I am a sensible person as an artist and as a human being, but I don't go into the trap, the offered trap of Mr. Rumsfeld and company, who is saying that these pictures are giving a depressive picture of the war. So I'm not going into this trap and to use the argument of hypersensitivity for myself. So I wrote down and I worked and I continue to work with this part, with the human destroyed body, to show it, to look at it, and to think that's an important part. And this part is even more important because it's not to see.
Our last question always seeks a projection towards the future. During the first social forum in Porto Alegre in 2001, the slogan, "Another world is possible," was coined. A momentum, the economic crisis of 2008, which the movement had in some ways predicted, strongly dampened it. Where do you think we can find that momentum today? In which movements or initiatives?
Another world is possible is beautiful. I also I use it to say another art is possible. That's the demand to myself. So, yes, look, what happened in Seattle, but also what happened after at Occupy Wall Street, in Paris, Nuit Debout, or with the Gilets jaunes movements, I'm very interested in. Why? I'm very interested because all these movements are not structured. They have no day after, in a way. In these movements, the moment is the momentum of the moment, here and yet there, is so important. This is the hope. This is the future. The precariousness of the moment is the future. Why? Because their moments are so intense. And that's what is the changing point, the intensity of these moments that we can learn. Sometimes I must laugh when some politicians or syndicates say, yeah, but now you have to go to make a structure. Now you have to go concrete. Now you have to organize yourself. No way. These moments are, in a way, the triumph of the precarious moment, the moment where you get the intensity who lasts for the whole life and who gives you capital to stay alert, to be standing right, and to be an actor in this world. And therefore, to me, the hope, the starting point, but also the end point always are these very few perhaps, but often graceful moments of resistance, in a way. That means resistance that just some person said, yes, I'm a human being. I'm in a relation with the work. And me too. I have an impact. I can have an impact to the world. Therefore, to me as an artist, then it's always the question of what do I think What do I do? Why I do art? Why I use the instrument art as I use it, and why and how I use the form or give the form I do. To me, it's an appeal to take over responsibility, and the responsibility in the moment. Yes, in the moment. That's so important. And it's not a kind of propaganda for sustainability. No, it's to be responsible here and now at the moment. Therefore, I see the future. Therefore, I see the positive. Therefore, I see the hope in the precariousness of these moments, the uncertainty, the uncanniness even, the moments where everything is so fragile, but also free.
This was the voice of Thomas Hirschhorn for Radio GAMeC 30 Years podcast.